This is part 2 on crossing the Jordan. We're reading context of what God said with regard to crossing the Jordan, and what this, so far in the first video, part of what we discussed and discovered is the process of crossing the Jordan, the emotional process of crossing, and the potential for getting complacent where we are and not wanting to go through the pain of what is required in order to receive blessing or inheritance. There's actually a lot that's required of us, and a lot of that is very emotional. Faith is an emotional journey, wondering if God is going to fulfill his promises in the midst of everybody else thinking that what you're believing in is crazy, in the midst of suffering, in the midst of all of the things that he puts us through in order to test us to make sure that we believe in him. It's very difficult, and it's an emotional process. Let's see what he has in store for us in this video. Numbers 33, verse 51. Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you. Destroy all their carved images and their cast idols, and demolish all their high places. Take possession of the land and settle in it, for I have given you the land to possess. Distribute the land by lot according to your clans. To a larger group give a larger inheritance, and to a smaller group a smaller one. Whatever falls to them by lot will be theirs, distributed according to your ancestral tribes. Okay, I was a businesswoman in the world. You got to have some guts to do some of the things that people do in business. You take a lot of risks and things like that. In the world, or as a worldly person, I've always had faith in God. So I really can't entirely say that I did all these things as a worldly person, because I frankly, it's not accurate. I didn't always know Christ, but I always had faith in God. He was always pulling me in. I just didn't have clarity on what it was, what he was, and what I was believing in. But I had a relationship with him. There was a relationship there. I can't deny that. And a lot of my decisions and the things that I was able to achieve in life did come from that faith. But in the world, people have a sort of like arrogance, pride, self-confidence that is totally unwarranted. So can you imagine what this would be like for the Israelites to believe that God was going to do this in the face of, I think of that story I think it's in Kings and also in Isaiah regarding Sennacherib, who's super arrogant and saying, don't listen to King Hezekiah, who says that the Lord is going to protect you. Don't listen to him. Haven't I brought down this nation and that nation and, blah, blah, blah. And is touting their own self-reliance, their own evil, and really in the process speaking against God, saying, I am bigger than God. Look at everything that I've done. And God foiled him. He foiled the king of Assyria. But that's scary. And remember that Hezekiah had some concern, and he brought it to the Lord, and he said, look, what he's saying is right. They have done this. But see, as God's people, that's one of the challenges, is like we look at all of the power that the world has, and then we see the story that's written. We see the story that's written in the Bible. My daughter was bringing this point up the other day. She was saying how the Israelites were like going through this in real time, and they didn't have the Bible. They didn't have the Bible to like look at and be like, oh, well, Jesus did this, and Paul did this, and so-and-so. They didn't have that documentation. They had the stories of their ancestors. They had the name God made for himself when he brought them out of Egypt. We have something at our disposal that we take for granted. You have something at your disposal right now that many of you are taking for granted. You have a witness here living these things out before you, showing you the things that God requires and what this journey looks like. But most people have taken that completely for granted. It's unfortunate, because at the end of the day, my task is going to be completed. My covenant will be fulfilled. Most people will not have listened. That's sad. It's really unfortunate. Okay, so the point that I'm making here is that we have to hold on to who God is, who he has said he is, who he's proven himself to be, who he was, who he is, and who he's going to reveal himself to be. That's his name. His name is Hayah. His name is not Yahweh. It's not Yah. It's Hayah. It was stated as a verb for a reason. God didn't make a boo-boo. What he is saying is, I have been, so I've demonstrated myself to be this. I made a name for myself. I am, and I am being revealed. And we have to trust in all of that, don't we? We have to remind ourselves, okay, this is what he did. He is, right now, this is what he's doing with me on a daily basis. And I know that he's going to reveal himself in this situation. I know who he promises himself to be. Faith is an emotional journey. It requires a lot from us. It is not handed over to us on a silver platter. Verse 55, but if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land, those you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They will give you trouble in the land where you live, and then I will do to you what I plan to do to them. Do you hear the attitude of God? There's an attitude there, and the attitude is, if you don't believe in me enough, I'm going to actually turn your enemies against you, and I myself am going to turn against you. I require this faith. I require it. It's not an option. It is a requirement in your covenant. Numbers 35, verse 9. Then the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, select some towns to be your cities of refuge, to which a person who has killed someone accidentally may flee. They will be places of refuge from the avenger, so that anyone accused of murder may not die before they stand trial before the assembly. These 6 towns you give will be your cities of refuge. Give 3 on this side of the Jordan and 3 in Canaan as cities of refuge. These 6 towns will be a place of refuge for Israelites and for foreigners residing among them, so that anyone who has killed another accidentally can flee there. If anyone strikes someone a fatal blow with an iron object, that person is a murderer. The murderer is to be put to death. Or if anyone is holding a stone and strikes someone a fatal blow with it, that person is a murderer. The murderer is to be put to death. Or if anyone is holding a wooden object and strikes someone a fatal blow with it, that person is a murderer. The murderer is to be put to death. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death. When the avenger comes upon the murderer, the avenger shall put the murderer to death. If anyone with malice aforethought shoves another or throws something at them intentionally so that they die, or if out of enmity one person hits another with their fist so that the other dies, that person is to be put to death. That person is a murderer. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death when they meet. But if without enmity someone suddenly pushes another or throws something at them unintentionally, or without seeing them drops on them a stone heavy enough to kill them and they die, then since that other person was not an enemy and no harm was intended, the assembly must judge between the accused and the avenger of blood according to these regulations. The assembly must protect the one accused of murder from the avenger of blood and send the accused back to the city of refuge to which they fled. The accused must stay there until the death of the high priest who was anointed with the holy oil. But if the accused ever goes outside the limits of the city of refuge to which they fled, and the avenger of blood finds them outside the city, the avenger of blood may kill the accused without being guilty of murder. The accused must stay in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. Only after the death of the high priest may they return to their own property. This is to have the force of law for you throughout the generations to come wherever you live. Anyone who kills a person is to be put to death as a murderer only on the testimony of witnesses, but no one is to be put to death on the testimony of only one witness. Do not accept a ransom for the life of a murderer who deserves to die. They are to be put to death. Do not accept a ransom for anyone who has fled to a city of refuge and so allow them to go back and live on their own land before the death of the high priest. Do not pollute the land where you are. Bloodshed pollutes the land, and atonement cannot be made for the land on which blood has been shed, except by the blood of the one who shed it. Do not defile the land where you live and where I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell among the Israelites. So one thing that stands out to me, and I know this might seem kind of random, but if someone, had accidentally killed someone who I love, I can reasonably see wanting that high priest to live and not wanting that person to be able to escape that land. I think everybody can understand that. But again, look at how much you're supposed to trust the Lord to know what is good, to conform all things. Because we might say, well, that's a random thing. That's just too random for this person to be freed from living in that land based on the death of the high priest. What if the high priest dies the very year that person has been condemned to go live there? And now there's no justice, right? That's what people say here. There's no justice. Well, they died before we could even get justice. This is a total denial of the authority of God, the sovereignty of God, and the justice of God. We don't have justice here. You think someone going to jail is justice? Do you think that someone like Jeffrey Epstein has gone to a better place and there's no justice? That is a denial of God. It's a denial of the one whose name is faithful and true. And do you realize that a lot of times when we are getting justice here, we've gotten our reward. When we take things by our own hands, we've gotten our reward. That's a common theme in Scripture. But if we don't, like there have been situations in which I could have sued someone and I did not, because the Lord does not have me doing that. Why? Because vengeance is His. We don't take away that from Him. And if we take it into our own hands, then you know what's going to happen? We've received our reward. Now, I'm not saying let's have a lawless society. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is you got to stay with God on these things. And you have to trust that He's going to be just. And these are the things that God was teaching the Israelites. It would be very difficult emotionally. Again, I'm telling you, faith is an emotional journey. It would be emotionally difficult, and we have to sort through emotional difficulty in order to bring our hearts to a place where we trust and believe in God, in His faithfulness, in His justice, in His righteousness, and in His plan. And that what He has established, He has accounted for everything. There are things that irk me probably on a daily basis. I think on a daily basis. I think that's reasonable and realistic to say. That I have chosen not to act on because God has told me not to act on them. And I wait for Him. I wait for His justice. I am not going to take that into my own hands. But on a daily basis, I am faced with them. I am reminded of them. I am hurt by them, and I still work my heart into God will avenge. God is faithful and true. I still work my heart into forgiveness. Why? Because I love God, and I believe in Him, and I respect Him, and that's what He's told me to do. Faith is an emotional process. Faith is not repressing all your feelings and just making a decision that you're just going to believe. You have to feel those feelings in order to know how you need to rend your heart. Otherwise, you're not actually doing the work to really believe in Him. You're just repressing. Please discern this message with God.